She was 19 years old, sitting in the rain in a wheelchair, and her father was standing in the doorway of a $12 million mansion, telling her she was a failed investment. Not a daughter, not a human being. A failed investment. The night Nia Brooks was thrown out by the family that was supposed to love her unconditionally, she made a decision to die quietly at a bus stop in the cold Seattle rain. Until a convoy of black SUVs pulled up, and a man in a charcoal suit stepped out and looked directly into her eyes. Not at the wheelchair, not at the rain-soaked hospital blanket across her legs, into her eyes. And everything changed. If you've ever been told you were worthless by the people who were supposed to protect you, this story is for you. Stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The rain came down hard on the night of Nia Brooks's 19th birthday. Not a gentle Seattle drizzle, not the kind of rain that makes people nostalgic and reflective, standing by windows with warm cups of coffee. This was the other kind, the kind that soaks through coats in seconds, that turns gutters into rivers, that makes traffic lights bleed red across wet asphalt and makes the whole city look like it's grieving something it can't name. Nia felt every drop of it. She sat in her wheelchair at the end of the circular driveway, the one paved with imported Italian stone that her father had spent $60,000 on because he said the contractors had gotten the color wrong the first time. She sat there while her chair's wheels slowly sank into the pooling water at the driveway's edge, while the hospital blanket across her paralyzed legs became so saturated it stopped providing any warmth at all, while her natural hair, the big, coiled crown she'd spent an hour shaping that morning, because she'd thought, stupidly, that maybe today would be different, collapsed flat against her face and neck. She sat there because there was nowhere else to go. Behind her, through the massive oak front door that still stood open, she could hear the muffled sounds of the birthday dinner that had been abandoned mid-course. Crystal glasses on a dining table. The low classical music her mother always played during family meals because silence made Eleanor Brooks uncomfortable. The distant voice of her 14-year-old brother Dylan already heading back upstairs without a word, the way he always did when things got ugly. Just turning his back and walking away, like Nia was a television program he'd grown bored of. She didn't turn around to look. She already knew what she would see. Her father, Victor Brooks, stood in the doorway. He was 53 years old, 6'2", built like a man who had spent his 20s doing real physical work before his money made that unnecessary. He had Nia's same dark skin, her same sharp jaw, and none of her capacity for doubt. Victor Brooks had not entertained doubt in over 2 decades. Doubt, he had told her once when she was 12 years old and terrified of her first surgery, was a luxury for people who had nothing to protect. He was wearing a charcoal dinner suit. His hands were in his pockets. His face was completely calm. "You understand why this is necessary," he said. It wasn't a question. Nia stared at the rain hitting the stone in front of her wheels. Each drop landed and shattered into smaller drops, and then those disappeared too. She thought about how water was like that, always becoming something else, always breaking apart, never staying in the shape it started. She thought about a lot of things in that moment that had nothing to do with what was happening to her, because her mind had learned a long time ago how to go sideways when the direct path was unbearable. "Nya!" His voice sharpened. He hated being ignored. "I heard you," she said. "Then say something." She finally looked back at him. The light from the foyer fell across his face, warm and amber, making him look like something out of a portrait, powerful, composed, permanent. The kind of man buildings get named after. The kind of man other men cross the street to shake hands with. He looked at her from the doorway of the house she had grown up in, and his expression held all the warmth of a business transaction being concluded on unfavorable terms. "What do you want me to say?" she asked. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that. She had promised herself it wouldn't shake. "That I understand?" "Fine. I understand." "Good. I understand that you've been counting down to this since the accident." She watched something flicker across his face. Not guilt, exactly, but the brief, involuntary response of a man who has been seen. "I understand that for 7 years you've been managing me the way you manage a liability on a balance sheet, minimizing the exposure, limiting the cost. And now that I'm an adult and you can make it legal, don't." His voice dropped. Not louder. Lower, which was worse. "You're cutting the loss. Victor Brooks was quiet for a long moment. Rain hammered the stone between them. "You have my card," he said finally. "The one I gave you at dinner. There is enough on it for 3 months of a residential facility. I have already made inquiries." "I'm not going to a facility. And there are excellent options for young adults with your level of—" "I said I'm not going. Mobility challenges." He finished the sentence cleanly, as if she hadn't spoken. As if her words were a minor interruption, he was contractually obligated to wait out. "The card will cover the deposit and first month's fees. After that, you'll need to apply for assistance programs, which the facility's administrative staff can help you with." He paused. "I've made sure the resources are there, Nia. I want to be clear about that. This is not abandonment." She almost laughed. She didn't, because laughing would have cracked something in her chest that she could not afford to have cracked right now. She needed everything inside her to stay exactly where it was. She needed it all held together. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he echoed, and the relief in his voice was so slight and so immediate that she knew he'd been afraid she would make a scene. Victor Brooks feared scenes above almost everything else. They were unpredictable. They were expensive. They created witnesses. He stepped back. The oak door swung shut. The amber light disappeared. Nia sat in the rain and looked at the door for a long time. She noticed the brass knocker was shaped like a lion. She had never really noticed that before. She'd passed through that door hundreds of times over the course of her life, and she had never once actually looked at the knocker. A lion with its mouth open, frozen mid-roar, going nowhere. She put her hands on the wheels of her chair and turned herself around. The driveway sloped down toward the iron gates, and she pushed herself slowly in that direction. Her arms ached before she even reached the halfway point. It was raining, and wet wheels on wet stones slipped and pulled in ways that made every push cost twice what it should. By the time she reached the gate, her shoulders were burning, and the blanket across her legs had gathered so much water it had started to feel like a physical weight. She pushed through the gate. She kept moving. There was a bus stop 3 blocks east. She knew this because she'd looked it up 6 weeks ago, in a way she hadn't fully admitted to herself at the time. The way you research escape routes while telling yourself you're just being thorough, just being smart, just being prepared. She had memorized the route numbers and the schedule and the fare. She had not told herself why. Now she knew why. She pushed herself through 3 blocks of Seattle rain, and every second of it was brutal in the specific grinding way that ordinary physical misery is brutal. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just wet and cold and hard and relentless. Her arms screaming, the chair's front wheels catching on every crack in the sidewalk, the water running down her face and into her eyes and her mouth. She counted the seconds. She counted the cracks. She kept her eyes on the next pool of streetlight and didn't think about anything that came after it. The bus stop had a small plexiglass shelter. Half of it was intact. The other half had been shattered at some point and replaced with a sheet of cardboard that someone had duct taped into place, and the cardboard had long since become pulp. So the shelter was really more of a suggestion of shelter. It kept the worst of the rain off one shoulder if she positioned the chair at a precise angle, which she did. She sat there. The card her father had given her was in her jacket pocket, wrapped in a small Ziploc bag she had packed that morning because she had known, somewhere underneath all the hope she hadn't been able to kill in herself, that she would end up in the rain tonight. She didn't take the card out. She thought about the residential facility. She thought about what it would look like. The beige corridors, the institutional lighting, the smell of disinfectant that residential care facilities always had, the way staff spoke to residents with that particular brand of practiced cheerfulness that was really just a professional distance with better branding. She had been in hospitals and rehabilitation centers enough times to know exactly what that world looked and felt and smelled like. She thought about spending the rest of her life in a place like that. She thought about the number 3. 3 months was what the card covered, and after 3 months came the assistance programs and the administrative staff and the paperwork and the waiting lists. And she had been on enough waiting lists in enough government offices to understand what that future actually looked like in practice. She stopped thinking. There was a route that came through here every 40 minutes. The next one was in 22 minutes. After that, the last bus of the night. She had not made a decision yet about what she was going to do when the bus came. She had not made a decision about anything. She was sitting in the remains of a bus shelter in the rain on her 19th birthday, with wet hands and burning shoulders, and a very small, very still voice somewhere in the back of her mind that had begun, very quietly, to stop arguing in favor of continuing.
She noticed this voice the way you notice a sound that's been present for a while before you actually register it. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just there, small and tired and asking, with genuine curiosity rather than anything that felt like despair, whether any of this was actually worth continuing. She didn't have a good answer. She put her hands in her lap and looked at the rain and waited. She heard them before she saw them. The sound of multiple heavy engines moving in close formation, expensive and low, the kind of sound that has weight to it. She turned her head and saw the headlights coming from the north. 3 black SUVs moving in a tight convoy that took up the full width of the road, moving with the specific, unhurried confidence of vehicles that do not expect to be challenged for their lane. They slowed. The lead SUV pulled to the curb directly in front of the bus stop, and the one behind it stopped parallel, and the third angled out slightly to close off the approach from the south. It happened quickly and precisely, the way things happen when they've been practiced until they're automatic. 2 men climbed out of the front and rear vehicles. Big men in dark suits, hands visible, eyes moving over the street in quick professional sweeps. Nia watched this with the detached clarity of someone who has already passed a certain threshold of shock and come out the other side into a strange, still country where things are simply observed rather than felt. She noted the men. She noted the vehicles. She noted that the middle SUV's rear door had not yet opened. Then it did. The man who stepped out was 31, maybe 32, with the lean, composed build of someone who had never stopped being physically dangerous, regardless of how expensive his suit became. The suit was charcoal, not the same shade as her father's, she noticed, darker, more severe. He had sharp Korean features and thick black hair, and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have stopped needing to assert themselves through movement, because their presence asserts itself without any help. He stepped around the pooling water with precision and walked toward the bus stop, and his security details stayed exactly where they were, which told her something about how much he trusted them and how much control he maintained without having to vocalize it. He stopped 6 feet away. He looked at her, not at the wheelchair, not at the blanket, not at the state of her hair or her jacket or the puddle her wheels were sitting in. He looked at her face, specifically, with focus, the way people look at you when they are actually trying to understand something about you rather than categorize you. Naya looked back. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "You've been here for a while," he said. His English was precise and slightly formal, but not accented in a way that made it effortful. It was the English of someone who learned it young and thoroughly. "Bus comes in 14 minutes, she said. "Where are you going?" She held his gaze. "I haven't decided yet." He was quiet, looking at her in a way that was considering rather than evaluating. There was a difference, and she felt it. Evaluation was something she had been subjected to by medical professionals and insurance adjusters and family members her entire life. That particular look that takes inventory of your limitations before it takes inventory of you. What she saw in his face was something different. He was looking at her the way someone looks at a situation they are trying to understand before deciding how to engage with it. "My name is Kong Tai Jin," he said. She said nothing. "And yours?" She thought about whether to answer. There was no real reason not to. There was also no real reason to be here at all, and she was, so the ordinary logic of self-protection had already been significantly disrupted for the evening. "Nia Brooks," she said. "Nia." He said it without mangling it, which people often did. The any sound was not intuitive to most people's mouths. "Your family's house is on Meridian View Drive." It was not a question. She felt the back of her neck go still. "You know it," she said carefully. "I know most of the significant properties in this city." He said it simply, without performance. "I was passing when I saw you turn out of the gate, 40 minutes ago." So he had seen. He had watched her push herself 3 blocks in the rain, alone, and had followed at a distance, and had now come to the bus stop. She considered what that meant. She considered whether it should frighten her. She found distantly that it didn't, primarily because the threshold for what frightened her had been substantially relocated over the course of the last hour. "And?" she said. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a card. He held it out toward her. She did not take it. "I'm not interested in charity," she said. "I'm not offering charity." He kept the card extended. "I'm offering a conversation.
Tonight, somewhere dry. You're under no obligation to agree to anything. You are under no obligation to stay longer than you want to." He paused. "But you're 19 years old, and you're alone in the rain on what I suspect is not a good night. And you have not moved toward that bus stop shelter with any conviction. And I have been watching you for 40 minutes, and I have not once seen you look at your phone." She said nothing. "People who intend to go somewhere look at their phones," he said. "They check maps. They check messages. They look for somewhere to be. You haven't done that once." Nia looked at him for a long moment. "Who are you?" she asked. Not his name. She had that, something else. "Someone who understands what it is to be considered a liability," he said, "and someone who built something very large from the position of having nothing." She looked at the card. She looked at the rain. She looked at the bus stop where, in 11 minutes, a bus would come, and she still had no idea what she would do when it arrived. She took the card. The next 3 hours were the strangest of her life, and given the competition, that was a significant statement. They drove her in the lead SUV. She was not asked to surrender her chair, which was folded and loaded into the rear vehicle by one of the security men who did it with a practiced efficiency that told her this accommodation had been made before. The interior of the vehicle was warm and quiet and smelled like leather and something faintly like cedar, and Naya sat in the back seat with her hands in her lap and watched Seattle pass through tinted windows and said very little. Taejin sat beside her but did not crowd her. He used his phone for much of the drive, fingers moving over the screen with the focused economy of someone managing multiple things simultaneously. He did not attempt to make conversation. He did not try to explain or preemptively justify or reassure her in the ways that people who wanted something from her always tried to reassure her. She watched him and said nothing and thought about what she knew and what she didn't. What she knew, he was wealthy, significantly. The vehicles, the security detail, the particular quality of his stillness, the way the security men moved. That wasn't the security of a businessman who had been threatened once and overreacted. That was something structural, something that had been built over time. What she didn't know, everything else. They took her to a building in the So-Do district, not one of the obvious luxury towers downtown, but a converted warehouse whose exterior gave nothing away. Inside, past a security checkpoint that scanned her without touching her, she found something that looked like a cross between a corporate headquarters and a high-security residence. Clean lines, real art on the walls, on the specific kind of controlled minimalism that costs more than maximalism because every object in the space had been chosen to be exactly what it was. There was a medical suite on the second floor. She noticed this because the elevator doors opened briefly on that floor, and she caught a glimpse of equipment she recognized. A proper clinical rehabilitation setup, not a home gym with a massage table. Someone who lived here had either needed or anticipated needing serious medical access. She filed this information away. They ended up in a room that was clearly a working office, but with seating arranged for actual conversation rather than the power arrangement of a desk and chair. Taejin's people did not follow them in. Someone brought tea without being asked, left it, and disappeared. Taejin sat down. He put his phone face down on the table, a gesture she recognized as deliberate, a choice to be present rather than managing other things. "Tell me about tonight," he said. She stared at him. "Excuse me? You don't have to. I'm not owed that story." He picked up his cup. "But you've been evaluating me since I introduced myself, which means you're deciding whether I'm safe to talk to, and I'd rather you make that decision with real information than in a vacuum." She sat with that for a moment. Then she told him. She didn't tell it the way she might have told a therapist or a caseworker, carefully, monitoring for judgment, shaping the narrative to be comprehensible. She told it the way you tell it when you're 19 and exhausted and wet and have nothing left to protect. She told it straight, with the sharp edges still on it. She told him about the accident when she was 12, the car, the other driver, the 6 weeks in the ICU, the diagnosis that her T6 spinal injury was permanent. She told him about the years of rehabilitation that had been funded, managed, and overseen by her father as a project rather than as an act of care. The way he had tracked her therapy outcomes in spreadsheets. The way he'd presented her medical updates to the family. The way he presented quarterly reports. She told him about her mother's particular variety of emotional absence, which was different from her father's coldness in that it had an apologetic texture to it,
Eleanor Brooks always seemed vaguely sorry about things, without ever actually changing them. She told him about Dylan, who at 14 had already learned to regard her primarily as an inconvenience. She told him about the birthday dinner, the speech her father gave, the one she'd known was coming, had known was coming for months in the way. You know weather is changing before you can see the clouds. Had prepared herself for and still been demolished by. The way her father had laid out the decision in the language of logistics and resource allocation. The way her mother had not looked at her during it. The way Dylan had been playing a game on his phone under the table. She told him about the rain. Taejin listened. He did not interrupt. He did not make the small, sympathetic sounds that people make when they are performing empathy rather than feeling it. He simply listened, with the full, still attention of someone who considered it important to understand things completely before responding to them. When she finished, the tea had gone cold. He was quiet for a moment. "The Brooks Real Estate Empire," he said. "I know the name. Your father's company controls about 14% of the commercial development permits currently active in King County." "Controlled," she said flatly. Past tense, eventually. "He's been overextended for 2 years. I read his company filings." Something shifted very slightly in Taejin's expression. Not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. "You read his filings?" "I had a lot of time during rehabilitation." She kept her voice even. "Reading financial documents is one of the few activities that doesn't require physical mobility. I started with his, then I started reading anything I could access. Annual reports, 10Ks, M&A disclosures. I couldn't go to school the way other kids did. I went to school in whatever way I could." She paused. "I know what overextension looks like. My father's been managing appearances for 18 months. Taejin looked at her with an expression she would spend a long time afterward trying to accurately name. It was not pity. It was not the particular brand of impressed condescension that people perform when someone they've underestimated does something competent. It was something quieter than that, something closer to recognition. "I want to tell you something," he said, "and I want you to listen to it fully before you respond." She waited. "I run businesses," he said, "legal ones and otherwise. The otherwise is not something I'll give you details about tonight, or until you've decided what you want from this conversation. But you should know it exists because I won't deceive you about the nature of what I am." He set his cup down. "My legal operations are global. Investment, development, logistics, private equity, several others. The management of those operations is something I need people for. People who are intelligent, disciplined, and capable of operating with absolute discretion." He paused. "I also have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind that comes with my position." He was precise about it, matter of fact. "My organization, the full organization, not just the legal side, is governed by a council of senior figures whose support I require to maintain my authority. That council has been applying significant pressure for the past year on a particular issue." He looked at her directly. "They want me married." Naya blinked. Whatever she had expected him to say, it hadn't been that. "The reasoning is traditional and therefore tedious," he continued, with the flat tone of someone who has had this conversation many times internally and is deeply bored by it. "A married boss is considered more stable, more invested in the organization's long-term interests, less likely to make volatile decisions. It's a political calculation dressed up as cultural expectation." He paused. "I have refused it for 3 years because the women who have been put in front of me as candidates are uniformly interested in power over me rather than partnership with me. And I will not spend my life managing someone who considers our marriage a ladder." She stared at him. "You're not serious," she said. "I'm entirely serious. I've known you for 3 hours." "Which is longer than most arranged marriages allow for," he said without irony. "And in those 3 hours, I've learned more about the quality of your mind than most people reveal in 3 years because you had nothing left to perform for." He held her gaze. "I'm not asking for love. I'm not asking for performance. I'm proposing a contract. Explicit, legal, mutually beneficial, with clearly defined terms and an exit structure if either party determines it isn't working." Nia sat very still. Her hands, she realized, had stopped shaking. She hadn't noticed them shaking before, but now she noticed they had stopped. "What would the terms be?" she said slowly. "For me, full medical care.
Continued rehabilitation access, the best available, indefinitely. A living space that meets your needs completely. An education, formal, through whatever institutions you choose, funded without limit. And a role in managing the legitimate business operations, structured, however, allows you to be most effective. Bache, he paused. Protection. Absolute, unconditional. No one who has wished you harm will be able to reach you. Another pause, waited. And you will be treated, in every context, as my equal. She looked at him for a long time. Outside, the rain was still coming down. She could hear it against the building's high windows. She thought about the bus stop. She thought about the card in her pocket, the one with 3 months on it. She thought about beige corridors and institutional lighting and the particular way people talked to you when they considered you a recipient of services rather than a person with agency. She thought about the way Tae-jin had looked at her face at the bus stop and not at the chair. "What's the exit structure?" she asked. The faintest thing, not quite a smile, but the structural suggestion of one, appeared at the edge of his expression. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded document. "My lawyers drafted this 3 weeks ago," he said. "When I told the council I would find my own solution on my own timeline." He laid it on the table in front of her. "Read it tonight. Ask me anything you want. Tell me what you'd change." She looked at the document. She looked at him. "You had this ready 3 weeks ago," she said. "I'm a planner." "And tonight, finding me at that bus stop was not planned," he said. And something in the directness of it, the absence of hesitation, the lack of any attempt to construct it as fate or as something cleaner than it was, made her believe him. "I was passing. I saw you come out of that gate alone. I saw you push yourself 3 blocks in the rain. I made a decision." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I recognize desperation that still has dignity in it," he said. "And I don't see it very often." Nya looked at the document on the table. She picked it up. She was still reading it. The 3rd page of 8, the section detailing the medical coverage provisions, which were extensive in a way that made something in her chest do something complicated. When her phone buzzed in her pocket, she ignored it. It buzzed again. She ignored it again. On the 3rd buzz, she glanced at the screen. It was a text from her mother. "Your father wants you to know the card has been deactivated. He's concerned you may make an impulsive decision with the funds. The residential facility can be contacted directly. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Nya stared at the text for a long moment. She put the phone face down on the table next to Tae-jin's. She went back to the document. She read all 8 pages. Then she turned back to the beginning and read them again. She found 3 terms she wanted changed: the exit timeline on page 4, the asset structure in section 7, and a clause on page 6 that she considered insufficiently precise about the scope of her management role. She marked them in the margins with the pen Tae-jin provided without being asked. She passed the document back to him. He read her notations. He was quiet for a moment. "The exit timeline. You want it shorter," he said. 6 months instead of 12. If either party determines incompatibility within 6 months, the separation should be clean and immediate. "Agreed," he made the notation. "The asset structure. The language in Section 7 implies my access to the business accounts is contingent on your approval for individual transactions. I want autonomous authority within a defined range without requiring sign-off." He looked at her. "What range?" 250,000. A pause. "Agreed," he said. And something in the pace of that agreement, the absence of negotiation, the recognition of what it meant to be taken seriously, did something to her she hadn't expected. "The scope clause," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I'll have the language redrafted. You'll approve the revision before signing." She nodded. They sat in silence for a moment. "I want to be clear about something," she said. "Go ahead." "I'm agreeing to read this. I'm agreeing to continue this conversation. I'm not agreeing to anything else tonight." She held his gaze. "I'll give you an answer in 48 hours. "That's reasonable." "And if I agree? If I agree, and you ever treat me the way I was treated tonight by my family?" She stopped. She started again because it was important to say it precisely. "If you ever look at me and see an investment that isn't returning value, I will walk out of whatever door is nearest,
and I will not look back. Do you understand that? Taejin looked at her with that quality of full attention she was still getting used to. The weight of being fully seen. I understand it, he said, and I want you to understand something in return. He leaned forward slightly. I don't collect people. I don't acquire problems to manage or keep broken things to feel powerful over them. If I wanted that, there are 100 easier options than this conversation. He paused. What I need is someone with the specific combination of intelligence, discipline, and, yes, desperation with dignity, who can operate beside me without either fearing what I am or trying to become it. What I've seen tonight suggests you might be that person. He sat back. But you are correct. 48 hours. And I'll answer any question you want answered in that time. She nodded. A room had been prepared for her. This, she understood, was not improvised, which told her several things she carefully noted and filed. The room was on the 4th floor, with a full accessible bathroom, a firm-wide bed, and a set of clothes in approximately her size folded on a chair. The chair in the room was wide enough and positioned at an angle that clearly assumed a wheelchair user. She stood at the door for a moment after Taejin had said goodnight and his people had withdrawn. She went in. She lay in the bed in the dark and listened to the rain and thought about everything she had read in 8 pages of legal language. She thought about the medical coverage provisions that specified no upper limit on rehabilitation access. She thought about the education clause. She thought about what it meant to have autonomous authority in a defined financial range. She thought about her mother's text. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. She lay in the dark for a long time. At some point, without deciding to, she slept. What she didn't know, in those first fragile hours, was that her father had already made his own series of decisions. That Victor Brooks, humiliated by his daughter's calm departure and calculating the reputational angles the way he calculated everything, had made phone calls. That he was already talking to lawyers about preemptive moves. That he was already considering what story to tell about why his daughter had left the family home and what version of events would cause the least damage to the Brooks name. She didn't know that one of Victor's phone calls had been to a man named Gerald Osei, who ran a mid-level private investigation firm that did the kind of work that didn't appear on its official client list. That Osei had been given a description of the black SUV convoy and a general description of the man who had stopped at the bus stop. She didn't know that by morning, Gerald Osei would have a name. And she didn't know what that name would set in motion, the chain of decisions and miscalculations that would begin with her father's pride and end somewhere none of them could yet see. She was asleep. Outside the building, the rain had finally stopped and the security team changed shifts in the pre-dawn dark. And in the Sodo district of Seattle, on the night of Nia Brooks's 19th birthday, everything that was about to happen was already in motion. The 48 hours passed. The way significant time always passes, not slowly, not quickly, but with the specific density of hours that carry weight. Nia spent the first morning alone. Nobody came to check on her. Nobody knocked with schedules or expectations or the particular brand of cheerful management that institutions use to make their control feel like care. Emil appeared outside her door at 7:30. She heard the quiet footsteps, the soft sound of a tray being set down, and then nothing. When she opened the door, the food was there and the hallway was empty in both directions. She ate at the window, looking out over the industrial district coming to life in the gray morning, delivery trucks and early workers, and the flat silver light of a Seattle morning that hadn't decided yet whether it was going to rain again. She thought about the document. She thought about it the way she thought about complex financial filings, breaking it into components, holding each piece separately, turning it over to look for the angles. The medical provisions were real. She'd seen enough institutional medical coverage in her life to recognize the difference between genuine access and the kind of coverage that sounds comprehensive until you need something specific. What Taejin's lawyers had drafted was specific in the right places. The education clause gave her genuine authority over the selection of programs and institutions. Not a suggestion, not a benefit subject to approval. A right, with funding attached. The exit structure, as she'd negotiated it, was clean. She was still thinking about the clause she hadn't flagged out loud. A single line on page 5 in the section defining her role within the legitimate business operations. The line read, "The party of the second part shall be granted access to all financial records and operational summaries for the designated portfolio businesses,
including but not limited to those listed in Appendix C. She hadn't asked about Appendix C. It hadn't been included in the document. She made a note of that. By the second morning, she had made her decision. She'd made it sometime in the night, with the particular quiet certainty of a decision that had already been building through all the visible deliberation and had simply arrived when it was ready. She lay in the dark and felt it settle and didn't fight it. The fighting, she had decided, was for later. There would be things worth fighting later. This wasn't one of them. She found Tae-jin on the third floor in what appeared to be his primary working space. Not the conversation room from their first night, but a room with 4 monitors and a standing desk and walls of windows that looked north toward the water. He was on a call when she appeared in the doorway, speaking in rapid Korean, and he saw her and held up one finger without breaking the conversation. She waited. 2 minutes later, he ended the call. "Appendix C," she said without preamble. He looked at her for a moment. "Sit down." "I'm fine standing." She wasn't. Her arms were still aching from the previous day's navigation of a space that hadn't been fully optimized for her chair yet, but she wasn't going to establish the habit of accepting comfort before establishing the habit of being direct. Appendix C wasn't included. "No," he said, "it wasn't." "Why?" "Because it contains information about the non-legal operations that I don't provide to anyone until I'm certain of the relationship." He said it without apology, but also without the performance of power that lesser men would have used. Just the fact of it. "You are not yet certain, and neither am I. That's what the 48 hours were for." "I've made my decision," she said. He looked at her steadily. "And?" "I'll sign, with one addition." "What addition?" "Appendix C gets included in the version I sign. I don't need to understand everything in it immediately. I don't need details you're not ready to give, but I need it to exist in the legal document so that when you do decide to share it, there's a structure for it. I'm not signing a contract with a blank in it." The silence in the room lasted exactly long enough to tell her he hadn't expected that. "You're signing a contract with a man who runs a criminal organization," he said, "and your concern is legal completeness." "My concern," she said, "is establishing from the first moment that I don't accept incomplete information. You can redact whatever you need to redact, but the appendix exists." She held his gaze. "That's my addition." Another silence. "Sit down," he said again. Different tone this time. She sat down. "I'll have it drafted today," he said. And then, with the same quality of directness she was learning to expect from him, "You're going to be difficult. You said you wanted someone who wouldn't fear what you are or try to become it." "I did say that." "Then difficult is what you get." The faintest edge of something crossed his face that she was already beginning to catalog as the closest he came to genuine amusement. He turned back to his monitors. "I'll call the lawyers. We sign this afternoon." They signed at 4 o'clock with 2 of his lawyers present and a notary who asked no questions. Nya read every page again before she touched the pen. One of the lawyers, a Korean-American woman in her 40s named Ms. Park, who had the crisp, entirely sealed affect of someone who had signed documents she couldn't discuss for 20 years, watched Nya read with an expression that was difficult to interpret and didn't try to rush her. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Nya signed anyway. The first week was an education in how a parallel world operates. The penthouse, her official residence now, per the contract, was the top 2 floors of a building in First Hill that presented itself to the city as a private investment firm's headquarters. The upper floors were residential. The building had 3 separate security checkpoints before you reached the elevator bank, 2 of which were invisible to anyone who didn't know to look. The staff, 8 people, a combination of security, domestic, and administrative, moved through the space with the economy of people who understood that discretion wasn't a preference but a professional requirement. Tae-jin was not there every night. He traveled Seoul, Hong Kong, Los Angeles, sometimes overnight, sometimes for 3 or 4 days. When he was absent, the building operated on exactly the same rhythm as when he was present, which told her something about how he'd built the structure around him. Nothing depended on him being in the room. When he was present, he worked. He worked the way serious people work. Not performatively, not with the theater of importance, but with genuine focused intensity that made the air in whatever room he occupied feel slightly more compressed. He woke before 5. He was on calls with Asia before the Seattle business day started. He ate at his desk more often than at a table. He slept, as far as she could determine, approximately 5 hours a night, and showed no signs of finding this insufficient. He was not warm. He was not cold either. That was the more accurate thing. He was precise. He said what he meant. He did not explain himself more than once. He did not ask for reassurance. He did not perform. She found, quietly and without announcement, that this was the first environment in her adult life that didn't exhaust her. The rehabilitation specialist arrived on the 4th day. His name was Dr. Marcus Webb, late 30s, built like a former athlete, with the specific kind of unhurried confidence that competent physical therapists have because they've seen enough bodies in enough conditions to stop being surprised by any of them. He came with equipment and with a program that he'd clearly been briefed on in detail, and his first question to her was not about her injury, but about her goals. Not functional goals, he said, sitting across from her in the medical suite with a notepad open. Not what the injury allows. What do you want to be able to do? Naya stared at him. Nobody had ever asked her that question. In 7 years of rehabilitation, the question had always been framed by the injury. What was possible given the damage? What could be recovered? What had to be accepted? The goal had always been defined by the ceiling of the possible, not the floor of the wanted. I want to stop losing ground, she said slowly. My upper body strength has been degrading for 2 years because my access to proper equipment was inconsistent. I want to reverse that. She paused. I want full independence in any environment, not adapted environments, any environment. Webb nodded. He wrote something down. What else? She hesitated. Then, I want to not feel like a passenger in my own body. He looked up from the notepad. That one I can work with, he said. They started the next morning at 6. It was brutal. She had expected it to be difficult, but there was a difference between intellectually anticipating difficulty and the specific reality of a body that had been under-supported for 2 years, being asked to do things it had stopped believing it could do. The first 2 weeks left her exhausted in a way that went all the way down into her bones. Not the bad kind of exhaustion, she learned to identify, but the productive kind, the kind that meant something was being rebuilt that had been allowed to fall into disrepair. She didn't complain. She hadn't been raised to complain. Or rather, she had been raised in an environment where complaint produced only the management of the complaint rather than its resolution. And she had learned early that the energy spent voicing difficulty was better spent moving through it. Webb noticed this. He said, one morning, about 3 weeks in, "You don't tell me when something hurts." "You can see when something hurts," she said. "I can see the physical response. I can't see the scale." He handed her the water bottle. "I need the scale." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because if you're pushing through an 8, I need to know it's an 8 and not a 4. Because there's a difference between productive pain and damage, and I can't make that call without your input." He held her gaze. "I'm not your father's medical team. I'm not managing you. I need you to talk to me." She drank the water. "It's a 6, she said. "The left shoulder." "Good. We'll modify the sequence." That was the thing about that first month that she hadn't anticipated. How much of the work was learning to communicate rather than endure. How much of her survival had been built on not needing anyone to know what things cost her. And how completely useless that particular skill was in an environment where people actually needed accurate information to help her effectively. She was sitting in an office. She had claimed a workspace on the 3rd floor, a corner desk with a sightline to both doors that she'd chosen deliberately and without being asked, going through financial summaries for a property management company in Portland that was listed in Appendix C's redacted portfolio when the first sign of trouble came. It arrived not with drama, but with the particular mundane intrusion of a phone call. It was her mother. She stared at the name on the screen for 3 full rings before she answered, because she needed those 3 rings to decide whether she was going to answer at all. She answered because refusing the call was a decision she wanted to make consciously, with the information the call would give her, rather than by default. "Mom," she said. "Nya." Eleanor Brooks's voice had its usual quality. Soft, slightly tentative, wrapped in the cotton of a woman who had spent 30 years managing her affect so carefully that the affect had become the substance. "I've been trying to reach you for 2 weeks." "I know." A pause. "Where are you?"
I'm fine. That isn't what I asked. No, Naya said. It isn't. She kept her voice even. She was getting better at even. What do you want, Mom? Another pause, longer. In the background of the call, she could hear the house, the particular ambient sound of a space she had grown up in, the hum of the climate system, something classical and distant. It hit her in the stomach with a specificity she hadn't expected, and she pressed her lips together and let it pass. Your father wants to talk to you, Eleanor said. There are things happening, Nia, with the company. Investors are asking questions that he didn't anticipate, and there are some relationships that have become complicated, and he thinks that... She stopped, started again. He wants to have a conversation. About what? About the situation. About how things ended. He wants a breath. He wants to try again. Nia thought about the night in the rain. She thought about the text from her mother with the deactivated card. She thought about Dylan on his phone under the table while their father delivered the speech that had ended her family. Tell him to call me himself, she said. You know how he is. I do, she said. That's why I'm telling you to have him call me himself. She ended the call. She sat with her hands flat on the desk and breathed for a moment. Then she went back to the Portland portfolio. She didn't tell Tai Jin about the call, not because she was hiding it, but because she was still processing what it meant, and she didn't process out loud. She processed through motion and work and the long, structured hours of rehabilitation and the financial documents she was teaching herself to read at the level she needed to read them. She told him 9 days later when Victor Brooks called directly. The call came at 9 in the evening when she was in the kitchen, a wide, professionally equipped space that she'd begun using because cooking was one of the things she'd always been able to do fully independently and had missed with a specificity she hadn't let herself acknowledge during the years when a residential kitchen hadn't been accessible to her. She was making rice when the number appeared on her screen. She knew immediately it was him. She didn't have the number saved, but she recognized the last 4 digits. They were the same as the code to the safe in his study, the one she'd known since she was 8 years old. She'd always thought that told you something about a certain kind of man. She answered, Nya. His voice was exactly the same. She had expected it to be different somehow, diminished, and it wasn't. It still had that quality of compression, of controlled force, like something under significant pressure maintaining its shape through discipline. Dad, she said, neutrally. I understand you're settled somewhere, he said. Your mother said you sounded well. I am well. Good. A pause. He was not a man who used pauses to gather himself. He used them deliberately to control the pace of exchanges. I'd like to meet. In person. There are things I want to say to you that are better said face to face. What things? Things that don't translate well to a phone call. Try, she said. She heard the brief, contained sound of a man suppressing an irritated response. Yeah. I'm giving you the opportunity, she said. Use it. A longer silence. The company is going through a difficult period, he said finally. You know the real estate sector has been... I know the sector. What's the specific problem? Another pause. 2 of our primary lending relationships have raised covenant concerns. There are performance triggers in several of the development project loans that require attention. And there have been inquiries from a regulatory body regarding a series of permits from 3 years ago. Nya was quiet for a moment. You need capital, and you need it to appear that the family is stable, she said. Nothing from his end. And you think my having reconnected with the family publicly would help manage the optics. She kept her voice completely level. You need a good news story. It would help, he said, quietly. It would help the family, Nia, your family. And in exchange for this help, she said, what are you offering? The silence this time was different in quality. It had the texture of a man who had not expected to be asked that question directly, who had expected the framing of family obligation to do the work that a business offer would have to do. This isn't a negotiation, he said. Then it's nothing, she said. Call me when you've decided which one it is. She ended the call. She sat in the kitchen with the rice going on the stove and looked at the phone for a long moment.
Then she turned the burner down and went to find Tai-jin. He was in his working room. He looked up when she came in. "My father called," she said. He set down what he was reading. She told him the full conversation, precisely, without editorializing. She told it the way she'd learned to tell things in the past weeks, with the specific accuracy she'd found he preferred, the details in the right order, nothing performed, nothing omitted. When she finished, she watched him process it. "What do you want to do?" he said. "Nothing yet. I want to understand what he actually needs before I make any decision." "He needs capital and clean press," Tai-jin said. "That's a two-part problem. The capital is a real estate liquidity issue. He's over-leveraged on projects that haven't hit their return projections. The regulatory inquiry is something different. Permits from 3 years ago." He leaned back slightly. "I'll have my people look at what's publicly available on the Brooks portfolio. It should tell us how serious the pressure actually is." "You don't need to do that," she said. "I know I don't need to," he said, with the simple directness she'd stopped finding startling. "Your situation is my situation. That's what you signed." She looked at him for a moment. She went back to the kitchen. The rice was ready. The information Tai-jin's people pulled on the Brooks Corporation over the following week told a story she had already outlined in her head from the filings she'd read, but with a level of granular detail that made the picture considerably more alarming than the public record suggested. 11 development projects across King County and 2 in Pierce County, 7 of them carrying performance covenant provisions in their primary lending agreements. A regulatory inquiry from the State Department of Commerce related to a series of commercial permits that had moved through the approval process in 2021 with unusual speed and minimal documentation. And a pattern in the equity structure of 4 projects that, when you looked at them side by side, suggested a complicated series of related party transactions that would be very difficult to explain to a regulator with a full set of documents. Victor Brooks was not just struggling. Victor Brooks was in serious trouble that he was currently managing to keep out of the public eye, and the window for that management was narrowing. She thought about this in the context of his phone call, and it made her colder than she had expected. Because the call made more sense now. He needed something, not just optics and capital, but a specific kind of credibility that she, as the reconnected daughter, could provide. A human interest story. The patriarch who reconciles with his estranged child at a moment of family crisis. The kind of story that generates sympathy, softens regulatory atmospheres, and makes lending relationships feel more secure. He had waited until he was desperate, and he had called her the same way he had always managed her, as a resource to be deployed. She was still sitting with that thought on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks later when the first gala invitation arrived. It was for the Pacific Northwest Charitable Trust annual dinner, the most visible philanthropic event in the Seattle social calendar, attended by every significant name in the city's business, civic, and cultural landscape. The invitation was addressed to Mr. Kang Tai-jin and Mrs. Kang Nya. She stared at the envelope for a long time. Mrs. Kang Nya. Nobody in her life, including the lawyers who had witnessed the contract signing, had used that name in her presence. It was the first time she had seen it written down. She sat with the feeling it produced, something complicated, not entirely comfortable, with several things inside it that she wasn't ready to separately examine. She brought the invitation to Tai-jin. "The Trust Gala," he said. "You know it. I donate to it. I attend most years." He looked at the invitation and then at her. "Is this a problem?" "It's not a problem," she said, "but it's the first public appearance. You understand what that means." "It means the city sees you for the first time." "It means my family sees me for the first time," she corrected. Victor Brooks never misses the Trust Gala. Tai-jin looked at her steadily. "Do you want to skip it?" She thought about it honestly. She thought about sitting across a room from her father and watching his face when he saw her. She thought about what it would feel like to be in that room in a different position than the one he had calculated for her. She thought about the invitation with her name on it. "No," she said. "I want to go." "Then we'll go." The preparation took 3 weeks. It was not vanity, or not only vanity. It was the specific, serious work of presenting herself in a room full of people who would be looking at her and making assessments, and she intended those assessments to be exactly what she chose them to be. Miss Park connected her with a designer, a Korean-American woman named Ji Hye, who worked out of a studio in Capitol Hill. and who, upon being told the full parameters of what was needed, including the wheelchair, did not blink, did not over-explain, did not offer sympathy. She looked at Naya the way a structural engineer looks at a load-bearing problem, and she said, "The chair is part of the design, not a constraint, a line." The dress was crimson. Nia wore it for the first time 4 days before the event, alone in her room, and she looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. She had not looked at herself, really looked, in years. She had been managing herself, maintaining herself, moving through the world at a level of physical self-regard that was purely functional. She had not looked for herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was not the girl who had been pushed out of a gate in the rain 6 months ago. She wasn't sure yet exactly who she was, but she was looking for it, and that itself was something she hadn't been able to do before. The night of the gala, she came down to the lobby of the First Hill building at 7:15. Taijin was already there, in a black suit, talking in a low voice to his head of security, a man named Jin Su, who had the specific quality of someone who operates most effectively when he is almost invisible. Taijin stopped talking when he heard the elevator. He looked at her. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "You're ready?" It wasn't a question. It wasn't flattery either. It was an assessment, made by someone who had learned in the preceding months to assess her accurately. "Yes," she said. They arrived at the venue, a restored ballroom in the Pike Place district, at 7:45. Jinsu's team was already in position. The venue had been surveyed. She knew all of this without being told because she had spent 3 weeks learning how events like this worked from the inside, learning that the visible social surface of a room like this had a structural layer underneath it that most people never saw. The room was full. It went quiet in that specific way. Large rooms go quiet when something notable enters. Not suddenly, but in a spreading wave, conversation pausing in rings outward from the entrance. She felt it. She had expected to feel it and had prepared for it. And still, the reality of 200 sets of eyes moving to her was something she had to breathe through. She breathed through it. She found her father 11 minutes after they entered the room. He was standing with the group of civic figures near the east windows, holding a glass of something amber, and he saw her at the same moment she saw him. She watched the sequence of reactions cross his face. Surprise first, sharp and unguarded. The face of a man who did not expect the thing in front of him. Then recognition. Then something she had never seen on Victor Brooks' face before, in all the years she had been his daughter. Calculation failing. Just for a moment. Just long enough to see that the calculation had hit something it couldn't immediately process. Then his composure returned and he straightened, and he began to move toward her across the room. Tae-jin beside her said quietly, "Company." "I see him," she said. "Do you want me to intercept?" "No," she said. "Let him come." She had prepared for this. She had prepared for it carefully, in the private rehearsal of her own mind, going through every version of this conversation she could construct. She had prepared for his contrition, for his anger, for his strategic warmth, for every combination of the weapons in his considerable arsenal. She had not prepared for him to look, as he crossed the room toward her, like a man who was afraid. Not of Tae-jin, not of the room, afraid of her. She sat with that as he arrived in front of her, and it did something to her chest that she couldn't entirely contain, because it turned out that seeing your father afraid of you was not as satisfying as you would have thought, and was in fact its own kind of complicated grief. He stopped. He looked at her. He looked at Tae-jin. "Victor," Tae-jin said, not warm, not hostile, simply acknowledging. Her father looked back at her. "Nya," he said. "You look—" "Dad," she said, quietly. No emotion she would hand him. "This isn't the conversation. Not here." He understood. He had always understood the management of public spaces. He gave a single nod. "When," he said, "I'll let you know." He looked at her for one more moment. This man who had told her she was a failed investment, who had handed her a card with 3 months on it and stood in a doorway while she wheeled into the rain. And then he stepped back and returned to his group, and she watched him go and felt the room continue around them. The crowd and the music and the particular electricity of a city's elite in a beautiful room together, and she breathed. She gave her speech 40 minutes later. She had written it herself. She had not shown it to Tae-jin or to anyone else beforehand because some things needed to come out in the shape they were in before anyone else touched them. She spoke about resilience without making it inspirational in the hollow way that word gets used. She spoke about what it costs to survive the people who are supposed to protect you. She did not name her father. She did not need to. When she finished, the room rose. She looked out at 200 standing people and felt, in her chest, something she had not felt in so long that she had stopped expecting to feel it, like she was standing on ground that was hers. Across the room, at the east windows, Victor Brooks did not applaud. He stood with his hands at his sides and looked at his daughter, and looked at the man beside her, and something shifted behind his eyes that she was too far away to read. She didn't know that her brother Dylan had been watching from the back of the room. She didn't know that Dylan, at 14 years old and already very much his father's son, had taken photos. Of her. Of Tae-jin. Of the way the room had responded. Of the particular angle of his sister's spine as she sat in that crimson dress and received a standing ovation from people Dylan had grown up being told were the most important people in Seattle. She didn't know that Dylan had sent those photos, along with his location, to a number she wouldn't have recognized, belonging to a man named Cho Min-jun, who worked for a faction within the Black Phoenix Syndicate that did not consider Kang Tae-jin's contract marriage to be the stabilizing development the council had hoped for. She didn't know that Cho Min-jun had been waiting for exactly this kind of visibility. She sat in the limousine on the way home, rain beginning again against the windows, the city sliding past in streaks of amber and red, and she thought about her father's face when he saw her, and about the speech she had given, and about the ground that felt like hers. And she was not yet afraid. The fear was 23 days away. It would arrive on a Tuesday morning outside a community center in the Rainier Valley district, and it would not arrive slowly. The Tuesday came the way Tuesdays always come, unremarkably, without announcement, with the flat, ordinary light of a mid-morning in late autumn that gives nothing away about what it intends to carry. Nia had been doing the community visits for 6 weeks by then. It had started as her idea, a structured program of outreach visits to disability support organizations across the city, partly as research for the charitable foundation she was building on paper, partly because she had spent enough time inside a controlled environment that she needed the friction of the actual world to think clearly. Tae-jin had agreed to it with conditions. Jin-soo's team, advanced security sweeps, a defined route filed 24 hours ahead, no deviations. She had followed the conditions exactly. The Rainier Valley Community Center was the fourth stop on that Tuesday's schedule. A low brick building set back from the street with a parking lot that held maybe 30 cars and a ramp at the main entrance that someone had retrofitted badly, the angle too steep and the surface cracked at the base. She had noted the ramp during the advanced sweep report and had marked it as something the foundation could potentially fund a repair for. Small things. Real things. The kind of work that didn't photograph well but mattered. Jin-soo's advance team had cleared the building at 9:45. She arrived at 10. The session was with a group of 12 young adults, ages 16 to 23, most of them in some form of transitional housing situation, all of them with various physical disabilities. A social worker named Terrence ran the group with the weary competence of someone who had been doing this work long enough to be realistic about it. He had shaken her hand at the entrance with both of his and said, "They've been looking forward to this." And she had believed him. She was 40 minutes into the session. They were talking, the group and she, about the specific exhaustion of navigating systems that were designed to manage you, rather than support you. And several of the young people were speaking with the raw, unguarded precision of people who almost never get to say these things to someone who recognizes them. When Jin-soo appeared in the doorway, she saw his face and knew immediately. Jin-soo did not have the kind of face that gave things away. In 3 months of operating alongside him, she had seen him respond to a dozen situations that would have produced visible stress in ordinary people, and he had been the same each time, contained, readable only to someone who had learned to look for the specific tells. The slight forward shift of his weight, the way his hands came to the sides rather than behind his back. Both of those things were present now. "Miss Kang," he said from the doorway. Quiet. Even. "I need a moment." She excused herself from the group. She used the exact phrasing she had practiced for interruptions, warm and unhurried, because she had learned that the way you leave a room is as important as the way you enter it, and followed Jin-soo into the corridor. He moved them to the far end, away from the session room door, And he turned to face her with the particular posture of someone delivering information they wished they did not have. "There's a vehicle," he said. "East side of the lot. It's been there since before we arrived. Black Escalade, no plates. My team flagged it on arrival but assessed it as low threat based on position. It's moved twice in the last 10 minutes. Repositioning." He paused. "And we've lost contact with Lee." Lee was the team member positioned at the rear of the building. Nia felt the back of her neck go cold. "How long?" she said. 4 minutes. "Have you called Tae-jin?" "Calling now, but—" He stopped himself. "But what?" "The route out is the front entrance, or the rear. The front is the lot with the Escalade. The rear is where Lee went silent." He looked at her with the specific gravity of someone communicating a situation without dressing it up. "We are not in a good position." She thought about the room behind her. 12 young people and a social worker who had no idea what was happening in the corridor. She thought about the bad ramp at the front entrance and the cracked surface at its base. She thought about 4 minutes of silence from a trained security operative. "Get the people inside away from the windows," she said, quietly. "Don't tell them what's happening." She looked at Jin-soo. "And get me a phone." He handed her his secondary without hesitation. She called Tae-jin. He picked up on the second ring. "Jin-soo's briefing me now," he said. He was already in motion. She could hear it in the background of the call, voices, movement, the specific quality of a room shifting from baseline to operational. "Stay where you are. Don't go to the exits." "Lee." "I know." A beat. "Yeah, look at me." He wasn't in front of her, but she understood the instruction. She focused. "This is a containment operation. They want to take you out of the building, not hurt you in it. Stay inside, stay away from exits and windows, and give Jin-soo whatever he needs. We have 12 minutes. "How do you know 12? "Because I know how these operations are timed." He said it without elaboration, and she filed the implication of that away because now was not the time for it. 12 minutes. The call ended. She handed the phone back to Jin-soo. She went back into the session room and told Terrence, quietly and without specifics, that there was a security situation and she needed everyone moved to the interior hallway away from the exterior walls. Terrence, to his significant credit, looked at her face and asked no questions. He simply stood and began calmly redirecting the group. 8 minutes later, she heard the front entrance. 2 men. She heard them before Jin-soo's remaining team member made contact. Footsteps on the bad ramp, the sound of the cracked surface, and then voices, low and coordinating, and then a short exchange that didn't resolve the way the men had intended. 3 minutes after that, Tae-jin walked through the side entrance of the Rainier Valley Community Center with Jin-soo's team and 4 additional men she didn't recognize, and the situation, which had lasted 11 minutes in total, was over. She was in the interior hallway with Terrence and the 12 young adults, her hands flat on her wheels and her breathing controlled, and when Tae-jin came through the door and found her, the thing that crossed his face in the half-second before his composure reasserted itself was something she had not seen on him before. He crossed to her. "You're uninjured," he said, checking, not asking. "Yes." He looked at her for a moment with that half-second thing still faintly present in his expression, and then it was gone, and he was back to operational. He turned to coordinate with his team. She stayed where she was and breathed and let the adrenaline that she had successfully kept out of her body during the 11 minutes do what it needed to do now that it was safe. Her hands were shaking. She put them in her lap and kept them there. She did not shake in front of the group. She waited until they were in the vehicle and moving before she let herself feel the full shape of what had just happened, and even then she felt it quietly, without display, the way she felt most things, inward and complete and hers. The man they had taken from the Escalade was named Seo Byung-chul. He was 44 years old, Korean national, with a professional history that Tae-jin's people assembled with a speed that told her this kind of research was a practiced capability. He had worked private security and enforcement for various organizational interests across the Pacific Northwest for 15 years. He was in the specific meaning of the world Nia had married into, a professional. And he had been sent. It was the scent that mattered. Not hired for a personal grievance, not acting on independent initiative. Sent. With a specific operational objective, a specific timeline, a specific extraction point.
She sat in the working room on the third floor while Tae-jin handled what needed to be handled. And she worked through the Portland financials because her mind needed something to do with its hands while the rest of it processed. And she was 3 pages into a quarterly summary when something she had been turning over for 23 days suddenly connected to something she was looking at on the page. She stopped. She went back 2 pages.
She read a specific entry in the transaction records for the Portland Property Management Company, a capital contribution from a holding entity listed in the records under a code name. She had seen the code before. She had seen it in the Brooks Corporation's related party transaction disclosures, the ones that she had noted 3 weeks ago as potentially problematic from a regulatory standpoint. She sat very still. She pulled up the Brooks filings on her laptop. She found the relevant disclosure. She put the 2 documents side by side. The holding entity was the same. She was still sitting with that when Tae-jin came in. She heard him come in, but she didn't look up immediately because she needed to be sure of what she was seeing before she spoke it out loud. She went through it once more. The transaction code, the holding entity designation, the date ranges, the capital flow. She went through it twice. Then she looked up. "Sit down," she said. He looked at her face and sat down. She turned the laptop toward him. She pointed to the Portland entry. She pointed to the Brooks filing. She said nothing and let him see it. He was quiet for a long moment. "How long have you known about this connection?" she said. Her voice was level. She had worked to make it level. She was still working. He looked at the documents and then at her. "I need to tell you something." "Yes," she said. "You do." He leaned forward. He put his hands on the desk, both of them flat, and she recognized this as his version of the gesture she made with her own hands when she needed to be grounded in something physical. The Brooks Corporation's commercial permit applications from 3 years ago, the ones under regulatory inquiry, moved through the King County approval process with assistance. That assistance came from connections within the city's development oversight apparatus that the syndicate maintains relationships with. He held her gaze. Your father's projects benefited from those relationships. He did not know the source of the assistance, and the syndicate did not know, at the time, that the projects belonged to Victor Brooks. She absorbed this. "When did you find out?" she said. "After you told me about his call, when my people pulled the public record on the Brooks portfolio." "That was 3 weeks ago." "Yes. You've known for 3 weeks that my father's company has an indirect exposure to the syndicate's operational network, and you didn't tell me." He didn't look away. "I was determining the scope before I brought it to you. That's not your determination to make alone." Her voice had gone very quiet. This was the register that came when she was most serious, and she knew he had learned to recognize it. "We have a contract. The contract specifies equal access to information affecting shared interests. This affects every shared interest we have." "Yes," he said, "it does." "Why did Seo Byung-chul try to take me this morning?" A pause. "Because there is a faction within the council," he said carefully, "that views the Brooks Corporation's regulatory exposure as a threat vector to the syndicate's legitimate business operations. If the regulatory inquiry expands and the permit assistance becomes traceable, it creates an evidentiary chain that my opponents on the council can use to challenge my leadership." He paused again. "The faction, led by a man named Cho Min-jun, believes that your existence as my public-facing wife makes the connection more visible, not less. The gala, your speech, the media coverage, every public appearance increases the chance that someone draws the line from you to your father to the permits." She sat with this. She was building the full shape of it in her mind, the way she built financial structures, finding the load-bearing points, understanding what was holding what up, identifying where the catastrophic failure would happen if any single element gave way. "Cho Min-jun sent Seo Byung-chul," she said. "Yes. To take me." "And do what?" Tae-jin's jaw tightened, the only visible sign of what was underneath the composure. "To use you as leverage to force me to step back from the public role, to agree to a quiet dissolution of the contract marriage and a restructuring of my position within the council." He said it precisely with the controlled flatness of someone reporting something that cost them to report. "Without you as a visible public presence, the connection becomes dormant. The regulatory inquiry has less momentum. Cho Min-jun gains ground." "And you," she said,
What do you lose? He met her eyes. The ground I've been building for 3 years, the legitimacy I've been constructing through the legal operations, the direction I've been moving the organization. A beat. And you? The room was very quiet.
Nia looked at the two documents still open on the laptop. She looked at the transaction codes and the holding entities and the date ranges. And she thought about her father's phone call and the regulatory inquiry and the permits and the 15 years of professional enforcement in Seo Byung-chul's history. And she thought about Dylan at the gala, with his phone taking photographs and sending them somewhere she hadn't known to look. Dylan, she said. Taejin's expression confirmed it before he spoke. Cho Min-jun cultivated him, he said. Your brother has been feeding information about your schedule and appearances for approximately 3 weeks. He approached Cho's network through a contact at his school, a student whose family has syndicate connections. Dylan believed he was helping your father gather intelligence on you. Taejin's voice was steady and without embellishment. He did not understand what he was actually providing access to. She thought about Dylan at 14, sitting at the dinner table with his phone under the table while their father ended her. She thought about Dylan at the gala, standing at the back of the room taking photographs. She thought about the word cultivated and what it meant in practice. The patient construction of a relationship with a child by people who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly what the child didn't know. She thought about whether she felt sorry for him. She found that she did, and she found that this made her furious in a way that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the full architecture of what had been done to both of them. Where's Dylan now? She said. With your parents. He's not in danger. Cho Min-jun has what he needed from him. Taejin paused. Your family doesn't know any of this. My family doesn't know anything, she said. That's been the defining feature of my relationship with them. She closed the laptop. She looked at the wall. She looked at her hands. I need you to tell me everything, she said. Not managed, not scoped, everything, all of it, tonight. Some of it is everything, she said again. And something in the way she said it, the complete absence of negotiation in it, the bedrock quality of it, settled in the room like a structural change. He told her. It took 4 hours. She asked questions throughout, specific and methodical, and he answered them with a directness that she understood cost him something. Not the information itself, but the act of giving it fully, the vulnerability of being completely known by someone. She understood that cost because she had been paying a version of it herself for months. By the time he finished, it was past 1 a.m. She was not the same person she had been when he started. This was not dramatic. It was not a revelation that broke her or rebuilt her in a single moment. It was the specific, quiet, molecular shift of someone who has been given a complete picture for the first time and whose understanding of every prior event has therefore permanently changed. She understood now what she had married into, not the outline of it, the full interior. She understood the syndicate structure, the council's composition, the fault lines between Taejin's faction and Cho Min-jun's, the operational geography, the legal architecture, the specific pressure points. She understood that she was not peripheral to any of this. She had become, without fully intending to, central to it. The public face, yes, but more than that. The variable that Cho Min-jun considered worth operational action. The element that Taejin had chosen to build around rather than manage around. The piece that did not fit the old equilibrium and therefore threatened it. She understood that there was no version of the next phase of her life that was safe in the way she had understood safety before. What happens to Cho Min-jun, she said. That's a council matter. It will be handled. When? Within the week. There is a process. And while the process is happening, she said, I'm a target. He didn't qualify it. Yes. She nodded slowly. She had been terrified for most of the evening, in the specific contained way she handled fear. Kept below the surface, processed through the intellect, converted into information rather than paralysis. She was still afraid. She would probably be afraid for a long time. But underneath the fear, something else had settled in that she recognized from the moments of her life when she had been most fully herself. The nights during rehabilitation when everything hurt and she had chosen to come back the next morning anyway, the moment at the bus stop when she had taken the card, the moment in the gala when she had looked at a room full of people and spoken the truth without softening it.
a clarity that came from having nothing left to pretend. I need to learn more, she said. Not just the legitimate operations, the rest of it. The structure, the decision-making, how the council functions, what Cho Min-jun's faction actually controls. She met his eyes. If I am a variable in this, I need to be a variable that knows what it's doing. Tae-jin looked at her for a long moment. That's not a small thing to ask, he said. I know. Once you know it, I know, she said again. I'm asking anyway. He was quiet. Outside, Seattle was wet and lit and moving in its nighttime rhythms, indifferent and continuous. And in the working room on the third floor, Nia Brooks, who had been a girl in the rain 6 months ago with nothing, who had signed a contract and learned to rebuild her body and learned to read a balance sheet at the speed of someone with something to prove, made the decision that completed her transformation from passenger to participant. She did not know yet what it would cost. She would find out when her father called for the third time, 3 days later, and the voice on the line was not her father's. It was Dylan's. She recognized it immediately. The particular register of her brother's voice, which was still caught between adolescence and whatever he was becoming, not yet settled into the lower frequencies of a man's voice, but already carrying something harder than a boy's. She recognized it and felt something in her stomach drop before he spoke a single word. Nya. Breathing wrong. Too fast. Too shallow. I need you to listen. She was already sitting up straighter in her chair, her hand tightening on the phone. Behind her, across the working room, Tae-jin looked up from his monitors. I'm listening, she said, level, controlled. I messed up. A sound that was not quite a sob. He was trying to hold it back. She could hear the effort. I messed up really bad, and I didn't know what they were going to do. I swear I didn't know. Dylan. She cut through it cleanly. Where are you? They have Dad. His voice cracked on the last word, and then he pulled it back together with the specific desperate grip of someone who knows they cannot afford to fall apart. They came to the house an hour ago, 4 of them. They took him out of the front door, and Mom is... She's in the house. She's okay. They said she's okay. But Naya, they took Dad, and they said, Stop! She kept her voice completely flat. Listen to me. Are you in the house right now? Yes. Where is your mother? Living room. She's not hurt, but she won't. She keeps calling his phone. Put her on. She won't. Dylan. She said it the way she had never said his name before. Not with the accumulated exhaustion of a sibling, not with the grief of someone navigating a family that had failed her. She said it with the specific authority of someone who had spent 3 months learning how to command a room. Put her on. A shuffling sound, a breath. Then Eleanor Brooks' voice, which was barely holding its shape. Yeah. Mom, are you hurt? No. No, I'm not hurt. A sound like glass about to break. They took your father. 4 men. They came through the front. I know. I'm handling it. Keep your doors locked. Don't call anyone else, and don't answer the door until I tell you to. Do you understand me? A pause. Then, with a quality she had never heard in her mother's voice before, something that was almost deference. Yes. She ended the call. She looked at Tae-jin. He was already on his feet. Cho Min-jun, she said. Yes. He was moving to the secure line on the wall panel, his face carrying that compressed quality that she had learned to read as the outer surface of something much colder and more purposeful running underneath. This is the countermove. The council session is in 4 days. He's creating leverage before it convenes. He took my father to get to you. He took your father to get to you, Tae-jin said, because you are the argument I'm making to the council. Your presence, your competence, the legitimate public architecture you've built, that's the case for the direction I'm moving the organization. He needs to destroy the argument before the session. She absorbed this. By showing that you can't protect your own family, she said, and by demonstrating that the Brooks connection creates operational liability. He picked up the secure line. If he can produce your father in a compromised position, videoed, documented, whatever form it takes, and distribute it before the session, it undermines everything I've built with the council's moderates. How long does he have? Before the council's session? 4 days. He was already dialing. Before he uses whatever he's recorded? Much less. He needs the impact to land with time for it to circulate. He looked at her directly. We have a window. It is not a large one.
The next 2 hours were the most compressed of her life. She watched Tai-Jin operate at a level she had understood intellectually, but not witnessed at full capacity. The rapid sequential decisions, the communication across 3 secure channels simultaneously, the way Jin Su and 2 men she didn't know came and went from the room with information and left with instructions, the entire machinery of it moving with a speed and precision that was almost architectural in its structure. She was not a passenger in it. She pulled Victor Brooks's phone records, not the full records, but the pattern of calls over the previous 72 hours, accessible through a network contact Tai-Jin's people maintained. She was looking for the point of contact, the moment Cho Min-jun's people had made the approach to Victor, because the approach would have happened before the physical extraction. There would have been a conversation, a meeting, possibly something that looked like an offer. Victor Brooks did not open his front door to 4 men without some prior communication. She found it in 40 minutes, a number her father had called 3 times in the preceding 48 hours. A number that didn't exist in any public registry, but that, when she ran it through the network contact's reverse lookup capability, came back connected to a commercial property in the Sodu district, a property that appeared in a real estate holding record she had read during her first week studying the legitimate portfolio listed under a subsidiary entity, a property that was not listed in Appendix C. She pulled the holding record. She cross-referenced it. She found the thread. Tai-Jin. Her voice cut across the room. He turned. She showed him what she had found. She watched his face as he processed it. The property, the holding entity, the connection to a subsidiary that sat outside the documented syndicate portfolio but maintained a structural relationship with it through 2 intermediary companies. A financial architecture that had been built to be invisible. Cho has been running a parallel structure, she said, outside the council's visibility. This property is one node. There are others. I haven't traced them all yet, but this one connects to at least 3 of the permit-related entities from the Brooks regulatory inquiry. She paused. He's not just challenging your leadership. He's been building his own operation inside the syndicate's infrastructure for at least 2 years. Tai-Jin was very still. If this goes to the council, she said, it's not a leadership challenge. It's a criminal fraud charge against a senior council member using syndicate resources without authorization. It changes the session entirely, he said. It changes everything, she said. But only if we have Victor. She said it simply, without drama, because drama would have slowed the next part, and they did not have time for slow. Her father had been taken to create leverage. The leverage only functioned if Victor Brooks remained in Cho Min-jun's control through the council session, which meant Cho's timeline for the operation extended exactly as long as he needed to hold one elderly real estate developer in a secure location, which meant they had a window. Tai-Jin looked at her for 1 full second, not evaluating, not deciding whether she was ready. Something else. Something that acknowledged what it meant that she had just done what she had done. Then he turned back to the secure line. The location came from Jin Su's team within the hour. A warehouse in the Georgetown District Industrial Zone, one of 3 properties in the Sodo-Georgetown corridor that Cho Min-jun's parallel structure controlled. The intelligence was solid, 2 independent confirms from contacts that Jin Su vouched for personally. Tai-Jin laid out the operational plan at the table in the working room with Jin Su and 2 senior team members whose names she now knew, Park Soo-hyun, tactical, who had been with Tai-Jin for 8 years, and a man who went by the name Ray, logistics, Korean-Japanese, who spoke less than anyone she had ever met and was apparently extremely good at what he did because of this. She sat at the table. Tai-Jin looked at her. "You're staying here?" "No," she said. "Nya. I found the location." She kept her voice even. "I found the financial structure. I understand the evidentiary chain we need to present to the council. If something goes wrong with the extraction and Victor is moved or the documentation is destroyed, I need to be positioned to reconstruct the case from what we already have." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking to breach the building. I'm asking to be in the vehicles, close enough that if the operation needs to adapt, I'm available." Jin Su said nothing. Park Soo-hyun said nothing. Tai-Jin looked at her for a long moment. "You stay in the vehicle," he said. "You do not exit regardless of what you hear. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Say it." "I stay in the vehicle." They moved at 11:45. 3 vehicles, the same formation she had ridden in the night she had first entered this world.
which struck her with the kind of detail that the mind reaches for when it is trying to stay grounded and present. She sat in the rear of the lead SUV with Jinsu's secondary operative and watched the Georgetown district pass in industrial amber and sodium light orange through the tinted windows, warehouses and freight facilities, and the particular emptiness of a district that operates by day and goes quiet at night. Her hands were still. She was not calm. She had stopped pretending, even to herself, that she was calm. Her pulse was elevated, and she could feel the blood in her temples, and her shoulders ached with the specific tension of a body that was afraid and managing it. But her hands were still, and her mind was clear, and that was what mattered. The vehicles stopped 2 blocks out. Through the earpiece Jinsu had given her, against the explicit parameters of the plan, technically, but he had given it to her without comment, and she had not raised the inconsistency. She heard the team move into position. 4-man entry team, Tae Jin and Park Soo-hyun direct, 2 covering exterior egress points, Ray on the communications and documentation side. She heard the entry. It was not what she expected. She had built a picture of it from the tactical discussions, and the picture was reasonably accurate in its broad architecture. But the reality of it through an earpiece was different in texture, compressed and fractured, voices clipped to essentials, the specific sounds of physical movement in a space, a shout in Korean that was cut off, something falling, a door. Then Tae-jin's voice, sharp and clear. "We have him. He's mobile, moving to egress south." She exhaled. Then she heard something she hadn't expected. A second voice. Different frequency, coming not through the earpiece but through the vehicle's external audio pickup that Jinsu's secondary had running. A voice outside. Close. Speaking Korean. She looked at Jinsu's secondary, a young man named Woo, 26, who had the alert, focused expression of someone who had just heard the same thing and was processing it at speed. He was reaching for his radio. "Wait," she said. He looked at her. She listened. The voice outside was not tactical communication. It was a phone call. Someone standing near the vehicle, on the eastern side, talking on a phone in low, urgent Korean. Her Korean was not fluent. It was 3 months of intensive study, enough to read documents with a dictionary and follow conversations at moderate speed. This was fast and colloquial, and she caught fragments rather than full sentences, but the fragments were enough. Council, session, already moved. She grabbed Woo's arm. "Tell Jinsu, the session time has been moved. Cho Min-jun's changed the timeline." Woo stared at her. "How do you—" "Tell him now." He relayed it. A beat of silence on the earpiece. Then Jinsu's voice. "Confirm source." "External audio. Someone on the east side of our vehicle. They don't know we're here." Another beat. Then Tae-jin's voice, different now. That compression she recognized as the exterior of something very cold and very fast running underneath. "Ray, council contact. Confirm session timing." 40 seconds that felt structural, like the 40 seconds before something gives way. Ray's voice. "Confirmed. Session moved to tomorrow morning. 6 a.m., Cho Min-jun filed the motion 2 hours ago." Tomorrow morning, not 4 days. 12 hours. She heard Tae-jin's breathing change on the earpiece. Barely, a fraction, the only tell he had when something hit him at the edge of what he had prepared for. Then, "Extract, everyone out, now." The vehicles moved within 4 minutes of that transmission. Victor Brooks in the second vehicle, conscious and frightened and physically unharmed, wrapped in a thermal blanket that someone had produced from somewhere, looking at the inside of an SUV with the expression of a man who has been moved very far, very fast, from every assumption he held about the architecture of the world. Nia saw him when they transferred him at the secure intermediate point, a parking structure in First Hill that Ray had pre-cleared. She saw him through the window of her vehicle, and he saw her, and the expression on his face when he recognized her was something she had not built a category for yet and did not have time to examine. She looked away. Back at the building, the war room version of the working space assembled itself within 20 minutes. Every relevant piece of documentation that Nia had traced in the preceding hours was on the secure server, organized by her into an evidentiary structure that could be presented to the council. Tae-jin was on 3 calls simultaneously, building the case with the council's moderates, the ones whose support was persuadable and whose votes could swing the session if the evidence was presented before Cho Min-jun could control the framing.
Victor Brooks sat in a chair in the room off the main corridor, attended by a medic who confirmed he was uninjured and said very little. He had been taken from his home. He had been held for 4 hours in a building that smelled like industrial solvent. He had been extracted by people he did not know, working for reasons he did not fully understand, and delivered to a building that was clearly something other than what its exterior suggested. He had been in the room for 20 minutes when he asked to see Nayai. She went. She did not want to go. She went because not going was a decision she would make consciously, rather than by avoidance. He was sitting in a chair that was slightly too low for a man of his height, which made him look diminished in a way the lighting might have anyway. He had blood on his collar, not his, she assessed, from the medic's report, and his dinner suit from whatever evening had been interrupted was torn at one shoulder. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Are you hurt?" she said. "No." His voice had that controlled quality, but thinner than she had heard it before. The compression still there, but the material behind it different. "Your people, not my people, my husband's." He was quiet for a moment. "You found me," he said. "Yes." "How?" "Your phone records, and 3 months of studying financial structures that I would not have been able to read 12 months ago." She kept her voice level. "You called a number connected to a man who wanted to use you as leverage against Tae-jin. You walked into it." His jaw tightened. "I thought it was an investor contact, someone who could—" "I know what you thought," she said. "You thought someone was offering you a way out of the financial situation you built. You thought the universe was presenting you with an opportunity when it was actually presenting you with a trap." She paused. "You've been making that mistake for 2 years. Reading what you want to see in a situation rather than what's there." He looked at the floor. "Yeah," he said. "Don't," she said. He looked up. "Not tonight," she said. "There are things that need to be said between us, and none of them happen tonight. Tonight you are going to sit in this room, and you are going to be grateful that your daughter married someone whose organization can find a person in 4 hours, and in the morning there's a council session that we need to survive, and after that—" She stopped. She started again with the specific deliberateness of someone saying something they need to say precisely. "After that, we'll talk. You and me. Without your lawyers, and without your assets, and without the architecture of authority you built around yourself. Just us." She held his gaze. "But not tonight." He nodded. "Once." She turned her chair and left the room. In the corridor, she stopped. She put her hands flat on her wheels and looked at the wall and breathed, and the thing that was in her chest was not triumph and not grief and not relief, but something that contained elements of all three and was larger than any of them individually, and she stayed with it for 30 seconds exactly, and then she went back to the working room. Tae-jin looked up when she came in. "The 3 council moderates," she said. "Do any of them have exposure to the financial structure I documented? Do any of them have connections to the subsidiary entities?" He thought for a moment. "Possibly one. Indirectly. Then we present to the other 2 first and let the third come to us. If the first 2 are committed, the third will calculate it's safer to be on the winning side." She moved to the desk. "What's their preferred format for documentation? Hard copy or digital?" Park Si-jun prefers hard copy. Nam-hyun Woo is digital. "I'll prepare both." She opened the laptop. "What time do we need to leave?" 5 a.m. She looked at the clock on the monitor. It was 1:47 in the morning. "Then I have 3 hours," she said, and she started to work. She worked with the specific burning focus of someone who has found the exact use for everything she is. The financial documents, the evidentiary chain, the holding entity connections, the parallel structure Cho Min-jun had built inside the syndicate's infrastructure. She assembled it into a presentation that was clean and precise and airtight, the kind of argument that does not require persuasion because the facts themselves do the work if they're organized correctly. Tae-jin worked beside her, not reviewing her work, working in parallel. The council communication architecture, the political groundwork, the preparation for whatever Cho Min-jun had prepared for the session. They worked in the same room with the focused, economical communication of people who had learned each other's working rhythms without announcing that they had done so. At 3:15, he set down what he was reading. "Yeah." She looked up. "Whatever happens in that session." He started. "Don't," she said. He stopped.
Don't do the thing where you prepare me for a bad outcome, she said. I know the outcomes. I've mapped them. She held his gaze. We've built a good case. We've built it in 3 hours out of nothing but a financial thread I found by accident and your council contacts and the fact that my father is alive and unharmed, which means Cho Min-jun's leverage is gone. She paused. It's a good case. Let it be a good case. He looked at her for a long moment. It's a good case, he said. At 4:50 a.m., Jin-soo appeared in the doorway. Vehicles are ready, he said. Naya saved the final version of the document package to the secure server. She closed the laptop. She straightened in her chair and rolled her shoulders back against the 3 hours of tension that had settled into the muscles there, and she felt the burn of it and noted it and set it aside. She looked at Taijin. Ready, she said. They went down to the vehicles in the dark, the building quiet around them, Seattle still in its last hour before dawn, and she sat in the back of the lead SUV and watched the city pass. And her hands were still, and her mind was clear, and somewhere across the city, in a room she had never seen, Cho Min-jun was walking into a council session that he believed he had already won. He had not yet seen what she had. Cho Min-jun had not yet seen what she had built. He found out at 6:17 a.m. The council session was held in a building in Bellevue that presented itself to the world as a private wealth management firm. 12 floors of glass and steel that looked like hundreds of other buildings in the eastern suburbs, unremarkable by design. The council chamber was on the 10th floor, a room that Naya had never seen before and had built an image of from Taijin's descriptions over the preceding weeks. Long table, 11 seats. The particular atmosphere of a room where decisions are made that will never appear in any public record. She was not in the chamber. The contract, the culture, the structure of the council, none of it had a provision for a spouse in the room, and she had not fought this. She understood which battles to fight and which ones to let the architecture handle. She sat in the anteroom outside the chamber with Jin-soo and Wu on a chair she had moved to position herself with a sight line to both the chamber door and the corridor entrance, and she waited. She had done everything she could do. The documentation package was on the secure tablets that Park Se-jun and Nam Hyun-woo had received at 5:45 a.m., delivered by Ray with the specific timing that Taejin had calculated would give them enough time to review, but not enough time for Cho Min-jun's people to intercept and contextualize. The evidentiary chain was clean. The parallel financial structure was documented from 4 independent angles. The holding entity connections were traceable and verified. She had done everything she could do, and now she was in the anteroom, and it was out of her hands, and she was learning, slowly, imperfectly, with significant resistance, that this was also a skill. The ability to release the outcome after the work was done. She was not good at it yet. The session lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. She knew it was going badly for Cho Min-jun at the 1-hour mark because she heard his voice through the chamber door, muffled but audible, raised in a way that she recognized as the sound of a contained man losing containment. The specific quality of anger that comes when a prepared argument encounters evidence it wasn't built to answer. She sat very still and listened to the quality of that voice, and felt something in her chest that was not satisfaction, exactly, but its more serious cousin. At 8:52 a.m., the chamber door opened. 2 men she didn't know came out first, council members by their bearing, moving with the careful neutrality of people who have just witnessed something significant and are processing where they stand. Then Park Soo-hyun, then Ray, then Tae-jin. She looked at his face. He looked at her. He gave her the single small nod that she had learned to read as his version of a thing that other people would have expressed with considerably more display. It was done. Cho Min-jun came out 4 minutes later, flanked by 2 council members who were not flanking him as a courtesy. He was 56 years old, heavier than Tae-jin, with a face that had been built over decades into a specific expression of authority. That expression was still there, structurally, the way a building's frame remains after everything else has been stripped, the form of it, without the substance. He walked toward the corridor. He passed within 8 feet of her. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke, but she saw in his eyes, in that brief and complete exchange, that he understood exactly who had built the case that had dismantled him, and that this understanding cost him something specific that she did not feel sorry about. He walked past.
She turned her chair back toward the chamber door. Tae-jin came to her. "It's done," he said. "I heard." The council voted 11-0 on the fraud charges. The parallel structure will be dissolved and the assets folded into the documented portfolio under full council oversight. He paused. Cho Min-jun has been removed from the council pending a full accounting. "The moderates," she said, "both committed before the session convened. The third followed, as you projected." Something in the quality of the way he said it, the specific acknowledgement in it, not performed, not generous in the hollow way, settled in her chest in a place she noted and did not examine right now. "The documentation was the argument. The documentation was yours." She nodded. She was very tired. She had not slept. She had worked for 3 hours and ridden through a pre-dawn city and sat in an anteroom for almost 3 hours, and her shoulders ached with the accumulated tension of a night that had asked her for everything she had, and she was very, very tired. "Can we go home?" she said. "Yes," he said, "we can go home." The conversation with her father happened 9 days later. She had asked for 9 days deliberately, not to punish him with the waiting, but because she needed the space between the crisis and the conversation to be long enough that neither of them would be operating from the adrenaline of what had just happened. She needed them both to arrive at the table as themselves, stripped of the emergency, carrying only what was actually there between them. She chose a neutral location, not the First Hill building. That was her ground, her structure, and she didn't want this conversation happening on ground that belonged entirely to her. Not the Meridian View house, that was his, and more than his, it was the place where the worst of it had happened, and she would not go back there for this. She chose a restaurant in Capitol Hill, midweek, mid-morning, when it was nearly empty. A booth that she could pull alongside in her chair. A table by a window with gray autumn light coming through. Victor Brooks arrived 4 minutes early. She noted this. Her father was never early. He was precisely on time, always, because being precisely on time was a form of control, an assertion that he had calibrated his day exactly right and that others should calibrate themselves to him. Being early meant he had miscalculated, or that he had wanted the time to compose himself before she arrived. She thought it was probably the second one. She arrived exactly on time. He stood when she came in. She noted that too. He was not a man who stood for people, as a rule. The gesture had a quality of deliberateness, of decision, that she filed alongside everything else she was observing about how he had prepared for this. She came to the table. She positioned her chair. She looked at him across the small surface between them. He sat down. A server appeared, was navigated, disappeared. They sat for a moment in silence that had the texture of two people deciding simultaneously where to begin something that has no clean beginning. "You saved my life," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Tae-jin's organization saved your life. I found the location." "That's not... It's a distinction that matters," she said. "I'm not telling you I didn't help. I'm telling you what the thing actually was, precisely, because I am done with the version of our relationship where we agree to describe things as other than what they are." He was quiet. "Okay," he said. She looked at her coffee. She looked at the window. She looked at her father, this man who had made her and discarded her and had been sitting 4 minutes early at a table waiting for the daughter he'd thrown into the rain, because somewhere between that night and this morning, something had shifted in him that she could see but not yet name. "I need to say something," he said, "and I need you to let me finish it." She waited. He put both hands flat on the table, and she recognized the gesture with a shock that she absorbed without showing, because it was her gesture, the one she used when she needed to be grounded, and she had not known until this moment that she had inherited it from him. "What I did on your birthday," he said, "was not a business decision." He said it slowly, with the specific weight of a man who has prepared a thing and is now discovering that preparation and delivery are different. "I told myself it was. I told myself for 7 years that I was managing a situation, making resource decisions, being rational about a reality that required rational management." He looked at the table. "I was wrong about what I was doing." She said nothing. "I was afraid," he said. The word came out stripped, without the architecture of qualification around it, and she could see what it cost him, a man who had not used that word in reference to himself in decades. When the accident happened, When they told us what the injury meant, I was afraid in a way I didn't know how to hold. And I did what I do with things I can't hold. I managed them. He looked up. I managed you. And I told myself that was the responsible thing to do. And I told myself that for 7 years until telling myself became easier than seeing what I was actually doing. The restaurant was quiet around them. Somewhere behind her, the sound of the kitchen, ordinary and continuous. I know, she said. He blinked. I've known for a long time, she said. I understood what was happening. I understood the mechanism of it. She kept her voice even, not cold, not warm, something more honest than either. Understanding it didn't make it less damaging. Knowing why someone treats you as a liability doesn't change the fact that they're treating you as a liability. She paused. You standing up when I came in and being early and telling me you were afraid, those are real things. I see them. But they don't undo the night in the rain, and they don't undo 7 years of being managed by my own father. And I'm not going to tell you they do, because that would be the old pattern, the one where I make things easier for you.
What's
So what I'm offering, she said, is this. Not forgiveness as a transaction, not reconciliation as a public narrative for the company's regulatory situation, not the good news story you called me looking for 2 months ago. She held his gaze. I'm offering the possibility of something real, built slowly, from nothing, with nothing assumed about where it ends up. You would have to be honest with me, which I'm not sure you know how to do with someone you're related to. You would have to accept that I am not the daughter you had before the accident, and I am not going to become her, and the life I'm building is mine and is not a consolation prize. She paused. And you would have to look at your son. Victor's face changed. Dylan, she said. What was done to him? By Cho Min-jun's people, through the school contact, through the months of cultivating a 14-year-old boy, that happened because Dylan is already learning to look for shortcuts to power. He is already learning that loyalty is a resource to be managed. He is learning it from watching you. She said it without accusation, with something harder than accusation, which was simply the fact of it. He didn't know what he was providing access to. He was a child being used by adults who understood exactly what they were doing. But he also made the choices he made, and nobody in that house is examining why. Her father was very still. He needs you to be different than you've been, she said. Not more successful, different. A long silence. I don't know if I know how, he said. And the honesty of it, the raw, undefended honesty of a man who has spent 53 years being certain, admitting uncertainty, landed in the space between them with the weight of something that had traveled a long distance to arrive. Then that's where you start, she said, with knowing that. She drank her coffee. He drank his. Outside the window, the city moved in its indifferent rhythms, people and traffic and the particular gray-gold quality of autumn light that Seattle produces in October, neither beautiful nor harsh, simply present. The company, he said eventually, is going to face the regulatory inquiry on its own terms, she said. I'm not going to use Taejin's connections to manage the permit situation. That is not a negotiation. It's a line. You're going to face what the company built, and you're going to face it with actual lawyers and actual accountants and the actual truth of what those permits were and weren't. She paused. I'll look at the financial structure as a private matter, not a business engagement. I'll tell you honestly what I see. What you do with that is yours. He nodded slowly. That's more than I deserve, he said. Yes, she said.
It is.
They sat for another 40 minutes. The conversation moved, haltingly, and then with increasing honesty, through things that had no clean resolution and weren't meant to. The years between the accident and the birthday, the specific events that had accumulated into the person she had become, and the distance that had become geographical as well as emotional. It was not a healing. It was the beginning of the conditions under which healing might eventually become possible, which was a different and more serious thing. When they stood to leave, when she turned her chair toward the door, and he stood again, that deliberate standing, he said, "The girl I put in the rain." She looked at him. "She was extraordinary," he said. "I just couldn't see it." She looked at him for a moment. She felt the thing in her chest, the complicated, multi-chambered thing that had no clean name and had been there since the first night, grief and love and fury, and the specific tenderness that survives even the worst damage, because some things are just structural to what you are. "She still is," Naya said. "That's the part you missed." She went through the door first. The Brooks Corporation's regulatory inquiry resolved over the following 4 months. It was not clean. 2 of the 11 development projects were found to have permit irregularities significant enough to require renegotiation with the county, and the related party transaction disclosures generated a civil inquiry that cost the company a substantial settlement. 3 of the overextended lending relationships were restructured at unfavorable terms. 1 project was sold at a loss to cover the capital gap. Victor Brooks did not lose everything, but he lost enough that the architecture of his life changed shape permanently, and the man who emerged from the other side of it was, in ways that were small and specific and real, different from the man who had handed his daughter a card with 3 months on it and stood in a doorway while she went into the rain. Dylan was enrolled in a different school in January. Victor had made the decision himself, without being asked, after a series of conversations with his son that Naya did not witness but heard about through her mother's phone calls, which had become a different kind of phone call than they had ever been before. Quieter, more honest, with less cotton around the truth. Dylan was 14 and confused and frightened in the way that adolescents are frightened when the story they've been told about their family turns out to be incomplete. He had not spoken to Naya directly. She did not force it. She left the door exactly as open as he needed it to be and no more. She thought about him more than she expected to. She thought about who he could become if someone paid attention in the right direction at the right time. She thought about Phoenix Haven, which was no longer a document on a secure server, but a building, a real one, a former residential facility in the Beacon Hill neighborhood that she had identified, negotiated the purchase of, and begun the renovation process on over the course of 6 months. 12 residential units, a rehabilitation suite that Webb had helped design, programming spaces, a small library, a garden that would take 2 years to grow into what she'd imagined but had already been planted. She had done this. Not Tae-jin's money alone, her money, the financial authority she had negotiated on page 6 of the original contract, multiplied through 18 months of managing the legitimate portfolio with the specific disciplined intelligence she had been applying to financial structures since she was 12 years old, in a hospital bed with nothing to do but read. Her foundation, her building, her program. She stood. She thought of it as standing, though she was in her chair, because standing was the physical sensation she associated with the specific quality of being fully upright in herself. In the main entrance of Phoenix Haven on the morning of its opening, and looked at the space around her, the light coming through the high windows, the smell of fresh paint, and the particular clean wood smell of new flooring. The quiet of a building that had been empty a long time and was about to stop being empty. Webb came and stood beside her. "Ready?" "Ask me something harder," she said. He smiled. He had earned the right to smile at her. 18 months of 6 a.m. sessions and a left shoulder that had been rebuilt from near dysfunction to something she trusted completely had earned him that. The first residents arrived that afternoon. 6 of them, ages 17 to 24, all of them navigating the specific intersection of physical disability and the absence of stable family support that she had been building this for. She met each of them at the entrance. She looked at each of them the way Tae-jin had looked at her at the bus stop. Not at the mobility aids or the medical histories or the case file summaries, but at their faces. Specifically, with the full attention of someone who considers it important to understand a person before categorizing them. She watched a 17-year-old girl named Amara come through the entrance in a manual chair with a posture that said she had been managing alone for a long time and had stopped expecting help that wasn't conditional. Nia recognized the posture from photographs of herself. She said, "I'm Nia. This is your place. If something doesn't work the way you need it to, you tell me directly." Amara looked at her for a moment. Then, "The ramp angle at the side entrance is too steep."
"I know," Nia said.
"It's being corrected Thursday. I've marked it."
Something shifted in Amara's expression. The specific microscopic shift of someone who is expected to be heard and then, improbably, been heard. Nia knew that shift from the inside. Taejin came that evening after the operational day had settled and the building had found its first night rhythm. He came without announcement, which was how he came to most things that mattered to him. Without performance, without the theater of arrival. He came in through the main entrance and found her in the common space, reviewing the week's rehabilitation schedule with Webb, and he waited until the conversation reached a natural pause before he came across the room. He looked at the space. He looked at her. "It's good," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." He sat in the chair beside her workstation, the one that had appeared there 2 weeks into the renovation, positioned at exactly the right height for her eye level, without comment or explanation, the way things tended to appear in spaces she worked in when he'd been in them long enough to assess what was needed. She looked at him. He looked at the space. They had not become a different kind of thing than they had agreed to be. There was no neat moment of declaration, no single night when everything shifted and was named. What had happened was slower and more serious than that, an accretion of specific moments, each one small, that had built over 18 months into something neither of them had designed, but both of them had built. She had learned the exact quality of his attention when he was genuinely concerned versus when he was managing a situation. He had learned that her silences had different textures and that the ones that required him to wait were different from the ones that required him to speak. She had learned that he kept photographs, not displayed in a drawer in the working room, images from his childhood in a city she had not yet visited. He had learned that she woke at 3 a.m. sometimes and worked rather than trying to return to sleep, and that this was a feature rather than a problem, and that the correct response was to leave a light on in the corridor. She did not say she loved him because the word felt insufficient for the specific structural thing that had been built. He did not say it either, for the same reason, and they understood each other's reasons without having discussed them. But she thought about the bus stop sometimes, the way he had looked at her face and not at the chair, in the rain, before he knew anything about her. She thought about what it meant that she had been at her lowest possible point, with nothing to offer and nothing to perform. And that was the moment someone had seen her most clearly. She thought it was probably the truest version of who they were, the thing that had been present before any of it was built, the recognition before the construction. "I want to show you something," she said. She led him through the building, the residential wing, the rehabilitation suite, the library with its half-empty shelves that would fill slowly as the program grew. She showed him the garden, which was dark and bare in the November evening, but had been planted with the specific care of someone thinking about spring. She showed him the wall. It was at the end of the main corridor, a full-width painted surface that she had commissioned from a muralist in the Central District, a woman named Diana Kwan, whose work she had been following for a year. The mural showed a phoenix not in flight, but in the specific moment before flight, wings half extended, 1 foot still on the ground. It was not heroic in the polished, inspirational way. It was physical and immediate. You could see the effort in the wings, the strain of the moment between earth and air, the specific cost of the transition. Taejin stood in front of it for a long time. "The moment before," he said. "Yes," she said. "That's the part nobody shows. They show the flight. I wanted the before." He looked at it with the quality of attention he gave to things that genuinely moved him. Still and complete, nothing performed about it. She sat beside him and they both looked at the mural in the quiet building. And the night settled around them with the particular weight of a night at the end of something long. And she thought about a girl in the rain at a bus stop who had been running out of reasons and had taken a card from a stranger because the alternative was sitting there until there was nothing left. She thought about what that girl would see, if she could see this. She decided she would see the mural. She would see the moment before. The wings half open, the 1 foot still on the ground, the effort visible in every line.
she would understand it. She had not been rescued. She needed to be clear about that. Clear with herself clearly, because the story of rescue was always available as an explanation, and it was always the wrong one. She had been offered a door. She had opened it herself. Everything inside it had been her own work, built on her own terms, in the direction she had chosen. The ground she stood on was hers because she had built it. That was the thing her father had missed. The thing Cho Min-jun had failed to account for. The thing the Brooks Corporation's financial filings had never captured and never would. She was not a variable to be managed or a liability to be carried, or a story to rehabilitate someone else's reputation. She was not a failed investment. She had never been those things. She had been, from the beginning, exactly what she was. A person with the specific, rare combination of intelligence and discipline and the capacity for desperation that still holds its dignity. And that combination had been present in the rain at the bus stop before anyone saw it. And it was present here, in this building that she had built, beside this man who had seen it first. Down the corridor, she heard the sound of voices. The residents settling into the first evening, the ordinary sounds of people beginning to exist in a space that was theirs. A laugh, brief and genuine, from behind one of the residential doors. The particular sound of a life beginning to believe it is ground to stand on. Nya Brooks, who was also Kang Nya, who was also the Black Phoenix Queen in the language of a world that needed names for things, who was most accurately described as simply herself, sat in the corridor of the building she had built and listened to that sound. She let herself have it, fully, without managing it or minimizing it or measuring it against what it had cost. She let it be what it was. Outside, Seattle was dark and wet and continuous, and somewhere across the city, her father was having a difficult conversation with his son about honesty. And somewhere in a Bellevue boardroom, the aftermath of a council session was still settling into its permanent shape. And somewhere a girl named Amara was lying in a room that was hers for the first time in her life, looking at the ceiling and beginning, slowly, carefully, with the specific tentativeness of someone who has been disappointed enough times to stop trusting good things quickly, to believe she was allowed to stay. None of this was clean, none of it was finished. The regulatory matters would grind forward in their institutional rhythms for another year. The council's new equilibrium would take time to stabilize. Dylan would be 14 for another year, and then 15, and then all the years after that. And who he became was still being written, and she intended to be present in that writing in whatever way she could earn. And Phoenix Haven would wake up tomorrow with 6 residents and a ramp at the side entrance that was being corrected Thursday, and a library with half-empty shelves and a garden that would need spring to become itself. And there was so much work left to do that the list of it was almost physical, almost a weight she could feel in her arms. She was not afraid of the work. She had never been afraid of the work. She had been afraid at various points of being alone in it, of being dismissed from it, of being told she was not the kind of person the work was for. She had been afraid of those things and had done the work anyway, and the doing had answered the fear in the only way fear can actually be answered, not by its removal, but by the accumulation of evidence that it was not determinative. Taejin shifted beside her. He did not speak. He was doing the thing he did in the spaces that didn't require filling, simply present, fully, in the way that had come to mean more to her than most declarations. She put her hand on the wheel of her chair. She thought about tomorrow, the schedule, the rehabilitation intake for 2 of the new residents, the foundation board meeting, the Portland Portfolio Quarterly that needed review, the conversation she still needed to have with the muralist about the garden wall. She thought about all of it with the specific grounded pleasure of a person who is exactly where they have chosen to be, doing exactly what they have chosen to do, in the company of someone who had seen them clearly from the beginning and had not flinched. The laugh came again from behind the residential door, genuine, unguarded. Nia listened to it. She did not think about the bus stop again that night. There was no need to. The bus stop was finished, complete, a closed chapter in a story that had moved past it into something that no longer needed to look back to know where it stood. The ground was hers. She was standing on it. That was enough. That had always been enough. It had just taken the rain, and the card, and the 8 pages, and the crimson dress, and the 3 hours in an anteroom, and the mural with the phoenix mid-transition, and all the mornings of work and all the evenings of building, to make the enough into something she could finally, fully, without qualification or apology, claim. She turned her chair toward the door. She went home.